For the first 30 seconds, I just want you to listen. Listen to the sound of my voice, the rhythm of my breathing. It's the sound of a man who has lived a long life, a life full of quiet moments. But quiet doesn't always mean peaceful. Sometimes quiet is the loudest sound in the world. It's the sound of a held breath, the sound of a footstep you pray you didn't hear. It's the sound of a door locked and bolted against a darkness that has no name. My name is Ethan, and I grew up in a place where the silence of the night was a scream you had to learn to ignore. I grew up in Havenwood, Ohio. And in Havenwood, we had only one rule. A rule so absolute, so deeply carved into the soul of the town that it was more than law. It was gospel. Never go outside at night. You're curious now, aren't you? You think it's just a scary story, a local legend to spook the kids. That's what I used to think too. Before the night, I learned that some rules aren't made to be broken. They're made to keep the monsters from breaking you. The town of Havenwood, Ohio, isn't on most maps. If you were to drive down Route 33, you might see a small, weathered sign, half swallowed by ivy, pointing down a road that looks more like a forgotten driveway than a public thoroughfare. We liked it that way. Invisibility was our shield. Our little hamlet was nestled in a shallow valley, surrounded by a dense, ancient forest that seemed to press in on us from all sides. The trees were mostly old-growth oak and hickory, thick and gnarled, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. They created a perpetual twilight, even on the sunniest of days. Growing up, the world felt small, contained. There were maybe 300 people in Havenwood. We had one general store, a gas station with a single perpetually grumpy attendant named Gus, a small church with a leaning steeple, and a school that housed kindergarten through 12th grade in the same squat brick building. Everyone knew everyone. We knew who was feuding with whom, whose daughter was sneaking cigarettes behind the bleachers, whose husband drank a little too much on Friday nights. It was a suffocatingly intimate community, woven together by shared histories and a single, unifying terror: the rule. It was the first thing you learned as a child, before your own name, it seemed. Never go outside at night. It wasn't presented as a suggestion. It was a commandment etched in stone. Our parents would drill it into us with a seriousness that bordered on panic. Their eyes would go wide and dark, their voices dropping to a hushed, urgent whisper. You hear me? Not for anything. Not if you hear a kitten crying. Not if you hear your own mother calling your name. You do not open that door. And we obeyed. We were good kids. We had to be. Fear is a powerful teacher. Our days were deceptively normal. We played baseball in dusty fields, swam in the creek during the hot, humid summers, and had town potlucks in the church basement. But as the sun began its slow descent, a palpable shift would occur. A collective anxiety would settle over Havenwood like a physical shroud. Laughter would die in throats. Conversations would become clipped, functional. Get the laundry in, Neri. Firewood stacked? Check the windows. The windows. Every house in Havenwood had them. Heavy, custom-made blackout shutters. Not curtains, shutters. Solid wood reinforced with iron bolts. As evening approached, the rhythmic thud and click of these shutters being closed and locked was the town's grim symphony. It was the sound of retreat, the sound of surrender. Then came the siren. At precisely 7 p.m. in the fall and winter and 9 p.m. in the spring and summer, a mournful wail would echo from the old firehouse. It was a decommissioned air raid siren from World War II. It only ever sounded once. A long, rising and falling cry that seemed to claw at your insides. That was the final warning, the period at the end of the sentence. Once that siren sang its lonely song, the world outside your four walls ceased to exist, Or rather, it ceased to be your world. It belonged to something else. We called them the night folk, the watchers, the whispering men. We had a dozen different names for them, but none of them felt adequate. How do you name something you've never seen? No one I knew had ever laid eyes on them. Not a clear look anyway. To see them was to be taken. And people were taken. It wasn't a frequent occurrence. Maybe once every few years. Someone would just disappear. A teenager who thought he was brave enough to take a dare. An old woman whose mind had started to wander, who unlatched her door in a moment of confusion. A traveler whose car broke down on the edge of town, who didn't know the rule. They'd be there one day and gone the next. No struggle, no witnesses, no trace. Just an open door, swinging gently in the morning breeze. My first brush with the reality of it all came when I was 7. We had a beagle named Rusty. He was a classic, troublemaking hound with floppy ears and a bay that could wake the dead. He was my best friend. One summer evening, I'd been playing fetch with him in the yard. My dad called me in. "Ethan, sun's getting low, let's go." I ran inside, but in my haste, I didn't realize the back gate hadn't latched properly. We went through the evening ritual. The shutters were bolted, the doors were locked. We ate dinner in a heavy silence, the kind that had become normal for us. Later, as I lay in my bed, a storm rolled in. Rain lashed against the roof, and thunder cracked like God snapping a whip. And then I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold. It was Rusty, baying, not his usual happy bark, but a terrified, yelping howl. It was coming from the backyard. I flew out of bed and ran to my parents' room. "Mom, Dad, it's Rusty, he's outside." My father's face, normally so kind and gentle, became a mask of stone. He grabbed my shoulders, his grip so tight it hurt. "Ethan, listen to me," he said, his voice deadly calm. "There is nothing we can do. You understand? We do not go outside." "But he's scared," I sobbed, tears streaming down my face. "We have to get him." "No," my mother whispered, pulling me into a hug. She was trembling. "We can't. We just can't." I fought them. I screamed and cried and begged. I could still hear Rusty, his howls growing more frantic, more pained. And then they were cut short, abruptly. One last choked-off yelp. And then silence. A silence that was so much worse than the howling. A deep, profound, absolute stillness that the storm itself seemed to respect. I never saw Rusty again. The next morning, the back gate was wide open. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, just his favorite squeaky toy, lying in a puddle of rainwater. My father found me staring at it, my small body rigid with a grief too big for it to hold. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just picked me up, held me tight, and I felt a shudder rack his entire body. It was the first time I understood that our parents weren't just enforcing a rule. They were terrified. Truly, deeply, existentially terrified. That incident cemented the fear in my heart. But as I grew older, fear gave way to a gnawing, resentful curiosity. What were the night folk? Why Havenwood? The adults refused to talk about it. Any questions were met with a stony silence or a clipped, "We don't talk about such things." It was a town-wide conspiracy of silence, a collective trauma we were all expected to carry without question. We tried to piece it together, of course. My friends and I would huddle in the school library, poring over old town records, searching for clues. We didn't find much. Havenwood was founded in the late 1700s, but the official histories were strangely sanitized. There were gaps, years where nothing seemed to happen. No births, no deaths, no marriages recorded, just blank pages. The only real story we had was the one whispered by Old Man Hemlock, a relic who lived on the edge of town and was considered half mad. He claimed his great-great-grandfather was one of the town's founders. He said they hadn't chosen this valley for its fertile soil or abundant timber. They were led here, fleeing something. And what they found in the woods was something else entirely, something ancient and powerful. They made a pact, he'd say, his milky eyes staring off into the distance. A deal. The town for a tithe. A safe place to live in exchange for obedience. And for the ones who didn't obey. He never finished that sentence. He'd just trail off, a shudder running through his frail body. High school was a crucible of hormonal rebellion clashing with primal fear. We were straining at the leash, desperate for a world bigger than our tiny, claustrophobic valley. The rule felt like a personal insult, a cage we couldn't see but felt every single night. The temptation to break it was a constant, itchy feeling under the skin. I remember one night, sophomore year. Me, my best friend Mark, and his girlfriend Jenny were at my place. My parents were out for a rare town meeting at the church, one of the few reasons anyone ever left their homes after the siren. And even then, they traveled in groups, their cars like a caravan of armored wagons. We were drinking stolen beer and feeling bolder than we had any right to be. Mark, his face flushed with booze and bravado, pointed to the heavily bolted front door. "I'm sick of it," he slurred. "I'm so sick of being scared. What's really out there? Seriously, probably just some crazy hermit who likes to mess with people. Old man Hemlock's spooky story." "Don't be an idiot, Mark," Jenny said, her voice tight with anxiety. "Isn't it?" he challenged, standing up and swaying slightly. "Has anyone ever actually seen anything? Or are we all just living our lives based on a ghost story?" He walked to the door and placed his hand on the deadbolt. "I'm gonna do it. I'm just gonna open it, just for a second." My heart hammered against my ribs. The memory of Rusty's final yelp screamed in my mind. "Mark, no," I said, my voice coming out as a croak. "Don't, please." He looked at me, a smirk on his face. But then he saw the genuine terror in my eyes. He saw Jenny, who was pale and shaking. The bravado faltered. He was a good guy, deep down. He wouldn't push it that far. He backed away from the door, trying to laugh it off, but the mood was shattered. The rest of the evening was spent in a tense silence, the weight of what he'd almost done hanging in the air between us. We never talked about it again. But that night planted a seed in me, a dangerous seed of what if? What if Mark was right? What if we were all prisoners of our own fear? The years rolled on. I graduated high school. I didn't leave. Most of us didn't. Where would we go? The world outside seemed just as frightening in its own way, and Havenwood, for all its strangeness, was home. I got a job at the general store, stocking shelves and making small talk. I dated a girl from a few streets over. Life fell into a predictable, safe rhythm. Day after day of sunlight and routine, night after night of locked doors and held breath. The what-if seed lay dormant, buried under the comfortable soil of familiarity. Until she arrived. Her name was Sarah. She drove into town on a bright Tuesday afternoon in a dusty Jeep with New York plates. She was a journalist, a freelance writer doing a series on forgotten small towns in America. She was beautiful in a way we weren't used to in Havenwood. She had sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through you, a cascade of dark curly hair she was always pushing out of her face, and a smile that was both confident and kind. She was like a splash of vibrant color in our muted grayscale world. She didn't know the rule. Her first evening, she was staying at the small two-room motel on the edge of town, which was mostly used by the occasional lost salesman. The 9 p.m. siren wailed its mournful tune. The town wrapped itself in its nightly cocoon of silence and steel. And Sarah, intrigued by the strange custom, decided to go for a walk. She told me about it the next day when she came into the store for coffee.
Her voice was full of a breezy curiosity that sent a chill down my spine.
"So, what's with the curfew?" she asked, leaning against the counter. "And that siren? It's like something out of a Stephen King novel. Very atmospheric." I fumbled with the coffee pot, nearly dropping it. Gus, the owner, shot me a look from behind the deli counter. A look that said, "Don't you dare." "It's just an old tradition," I mumbled, not meeting her eyes. "This town, we like our peace and quiet." "Peace and quiet?" She laughed, a bright, clear sound that felt alien in the dusty store. It was dead silent. I mean, unnervingly so. I walked all the way to the old church and back, didn't see a single soul. I felt like I was the last person on earth. The only thing I heard was this weird clicking sound, like pebbles being tapped together, came from the woods. I froze. The coffee cup in my hand started to tremble. The clicking. Old Man Hemlock had talked about the clicking. Like stones in a dead man's pocket, he'd rasped. "You shouldn't have done that," I said, my voice low and urgent. "You can't go out at night. Ever." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued by my intensity. "Why not? What's going to happen? Is the town bogeyman going to get me?" "It's not a joke," I snapped, harsher than I intended. I saw a flicker of surprise, maybe even hurt in her eyes. I took a deep breath. "Look, I can't explain it. Just trust me. If you're staying in Havenwood, you stay inside after the siren. No exceptions." My fear, my genuine, raw fear, seemed to finally get through to her. She didn't mock it. She just studied my face for a long moment, her journalistic instincts kicking in. She had found her story. Over the next few weeks, Sarah became a fixture in town. She was relentless. She interviewed everyone. She tried to talk to Gus, who just grunted and polished the counter. She tried to talk to the pastor, who gave her vague, unhelpful sermons about the temptations of the dark. She even tried to talk to Old Man Hemlock, who took one look at her notepad and slammed the door in her face. The town closed ranks. We were experts at it. We treated her with a polite but firm distance. She was an outsider, and she was asking questions about the one thing we never, ever discussed. But she was persistent, and she was smart. She started spending her days in the library, the same one my friends and I had scoured years ago. And she started spending her evenings with me. It began innocently enough. She'd come to the store just before closing, and we'd talk. She was easy to talk to. She told me about New York City, about her dreams of being a foreign correspondent, about a world so vast and different from my own that it felt like a fantasy. And I, in turn, found myself opening up to her. I told her about growing up here, about the suffocating safety of it all. I told her about Mark and Jenny and the night we almost broke the rule. I even, after a few days, told her about Rusty. She listened, her expression full of a sympathy that felt real, not pitying, but genuinely compassionate. "Ethan," she said softly one evening as I locked the store's front door and she stood on the sidewalk, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and blood. "I'm sorry about your dog. That's horrible." "It's just the way things are," I said, shrugging, a gesture I'd perfected over 2 decades. "But it doesn't have to be," she insisted, her eyes flashing with passion. "You can't live like this. This town is living in the Dark Ages, ruled by a superstition. There has to be a rational explanation for all of this." "You heard the clicking," I reminded her. "Was that rational?" "It could have been anything. Tree branches, animals. Listen, Ethan, I want to find out what's really going on here, but I can't do it alone. The whole town has shut me out. You're the only one who's been straight with me. You're afraid, I can see that. But you're also curious, aren't you? Don't you want to know what you've been hiding from your whole life?" She was right. The seed of what if that had been dormant for so long began to sprout. I was curious, terrified, but curious. Spending time with her, seeing my home through her disbelieving eyes, made the whole thing seem absurd.
Were we really a town of 300 people cowering in our homes every night because of a ghost story? What do you want to do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper.
I found something, she said, her own voice dropping with excitement. In the library, tucked inside an old almanac. It's a diary, the Reverend's wife from 1792, Elspeth Thorne. It's not sanitized like the official records. It's real, and it's horrifying. We went back to her motel room. The sun had dipped below the tree line now, and the familiar knot of anxiety was tightening in my stomach. The siren would be sounding soon. Inside her room, which was a chaotic mess of papers, books, and clothes, she carefully pulled a small leather-bound book from her bag. The leather was cracked and worn, the pages yellowed and brittle. Her husband was Reverend Michael Thorne, Sarah explained, handling the diary with reverence. He was the leader of the group that founded Havenwood. According to this, they weren't pioneers, they were fugitives. She began to read, her voice filling the small room as the last vestiges of daylight disappeared. The story that unfolded from those spidery, faded ink strokes was far worse than anything Old Man Hemlock had ever hinted at. Elspeth Thorne wrote of a religious sect, a devout but persecuted group who fled their home in the East. They traveled for months, seeking a promised land, a place to practice their faith in peace. But they were pursued, not by men, but by a sickness of the soul, as she put it. A darkness that clung to them, causing madness, death, and despair. They were on the verge of collapse when they stumbled into this valley. And in the valley, they found it was already occupied. She didn't describe them, not clearly. She called them the Silent Ones, the children of the wood. She wrote that they were not of God's creation, but something older, something born of the earth in the shadows between the trees. At first, the settlers were terrified, but the entities did not harm them. They watched, always watching from the tree line. Then, the sickness that had pursued the settlers found them in the valley. People began to fall ill again, their minds fracturing. Reverend Thorne, in his desperation, went into the woods to pray for salvation. He returned a changed man. He told his flock that he had met with the valley's keepers. He had made a covenant. Sarah's hand trembled as she read that part. The covenant was simple. The Silent Ones would cleanse the sickness from the settlers. They would provide protection, prosperity, and peace. In exchange, the settlers would give them the night. The dark hours were to be theirs and theirs alone. The settlers would remain in their homes, their windows covered, their doors locked, to show fealty. They would become the keepers of the day, and the Silent Ones would be the keepers of the night. But there was another part to the bargain, a tithe, just as Old Man Hemlock had said. The diary spoke it in hushed, terrified tones. The Silent Ones required sustenance, not of the flesh, but of something else. The wayward, the unruly, the curious. Those who broke the covenant, who trespassed in the night, would be gathered. Their life force, their energy, their very essence would be taken to sustain the pact and keep the ancient sickness at bay. The disappearances weren't a punishment. They were a sacrifice, a tax. The siren wailed outside, a long, mournful cry that made me jump out of my skin. The sound had never felt so menacing. I looked at the motel window, at the cheap curtain that suddenly felt as flimsy as paper. So it's true, I breathed, the air leaving my lungs in a rush. All of it. We're a farm, a human farm. It gets worse, Sarah said, her face pale in the dim lamplight. She turned a few pages. The sickness they were fleeing, Elspeth describes the symptoms: paranoia, hallucinations, violent outbursts, an inability to perceive reality. At the end of her life, she started to wonder if the sickness ever left at all, or if the Silent Ones just gave it a new shape. She read the final chilling entry, written in a shaky, almost illegible hand.
Michael says our fear is the wall that protects us. He says our obedience is the key to our salvation. But I watch the children play in the sun, and I see the fear in their eyes when dusk comes. We have not built a haven, we have built a cage. And I fear the wardens are not the creatures in the woods. I fear they are us. I fear the real sickness is the rule itself.
We sat in silence for a long time after that. The only sound was the hum of the motel's mini-fridge and the frantic beating of my own heart. The world I had known my entire life had been shattered and reassembled into something monstrous. The rule wasn't to protect us from the monsters. It was to feed them. Our fear was their dinner bell. "What do we do?" I finally asked, looking at Sarah. She was the outsider, the one with a foot in the real world. She had to have an answer. Her jaw was set, her eyes burning with a terrifying fire I hadn't seen before. It was the look of a journalist who had the story of a lifetime, a look of ambition and righteous fury that completely overshadowed fear. "We expose it," she said, her voice firm. "We show the world what's happening here. We get proof." "Proof?" I laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "What kind of proof? A picture of something no one has ever seen? A 200-year-old diary? They'll say we're crazy. They'll lock us up." "No," she said, leaning forward, her energy electric. "We give them undeniable proof. We film them." The room went cold. "What are you talking about? No, absolutely not. Sarah, you don't understand. To see them is to be taken. It's a death sentence." "Is it?" she countered. "Or is that just part of the story they tell you to keep you in line? Elspeth said they take the wayward, the unruly. We're not going out there to be unruly. We're going out there to be observers. We'll be careful. We'll be prepared. I have cameras, night vision cameras, high-powered microphones. We can set them up at the edge of the woods, stay hidden. We can finally see what these watchers really are." It was the most insane, suicidal plan I had ever heard. Every instinct in my body, every lesson drilled into me since birth, screamed at me to run, to lock myself in my house and never speak to this woman again. But then I thought of Rusty, howling in the dark. I thought of the blank pages in the town registry. I thought of the faces of my neighbors, their expressions of quiet, unending dread. I thought of my entire life, lived in a cage built of fear. Elspeth Thorne's final words echoed in my mind. The real sickness is the rule itself. Maybe the only way to cure the sickness was to face it. "Okay," I heard myself say, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. "Okay, I'll help you." The next 3 days were a blur of nervous energy and clandestine planning. Sarah was a professional. She had a surprising amount of gear in her Jeep. 3 small, high-definition cameras with night vision capabilities, a parabolic microphone to capture distant sounds, laptops, and more batteries and memory cards than I had ever seen. My role was logistics. I knew the town. I knew the woods. I chose a spot deep in the forest behind my house, a place where a small rocky outcrop provided a natural blind. It offered a clear view of a game trail that led from the deeper woods toward the edge of town. A path I always felt, illogically, was a major thoroughfare for them. We spent 2 afternoons under the guise of hiking, setting up our observation post. We camouflaged the cameras, ran the wiring, and created a small hiding spot for ourselves dug into the hillside, covered with a screen of branches and leaves. It felt like we were soldiers preparing for war. The fear was a constant, metallic taste in my mouth. I barely slept. Every creak of my house at night made me jump. I would stare at my bolted shutters and feel a wave of nausea. What were we doing? This was a line that had never been crossed. Sarah, on the other hand, was energized. Her fear was sublimated into focus. She checked her equipment obsessively, planned camera angles, and talked about exposure settings and audio levels. It was her way of coping, of turning the incomprehensible into a technical problem that could be solved. But I could see the tension in the tight set of her jaw, the way her fingers constantly tapped against any available surface.
She was scared too. She was just better at hiding it. The night we chose was moonless. A thick blanket of clouds promised absolute darkness, perfect for our purposes. As dusk began to fall, the familiar anxiety descended upon Havenwood. The thud of shutters being bolted echoed through the valley. I met Sarah at the edge of the woods, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I told my parents I was staying at a friend's house, a lie so profound in its transgression that it felt like a physical weight. "Ready?" she whispered, her face barely visible in the gathering gloom. She was dressed in dark clothing, a backpack full of gear slung over her shoulder.
I just nodded, unable to speak. My throat was too tight. We slipped into the woods. The familiar trees of my childhood suddenly seemed alien and menacing. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot sounded like a gunshot. The air grew colder, heavier. By the time we reached our hiding spot, night had fallen completely, a deep, silent, suffocating dark. The siren wailed in the distance. The sound was different out here. It wasn't a warning, it was a starting gun. The world was now theirs. We crawled into our cramped hideout. Sarah powered up the equipment. 3 small monitors flickered to life, casting a ghostly green glow on our faces. The world outside, which was pitch black to our eyes, was rendered in grainy, ethereal detail on the screens. The parabolic mic was live, and through the headphones, every sound was amplified. The whisper of the wind, the skittering of some small creature, the frantic thumping of my own heart. And then we waited. The first hour was agonizing. The silence was the worst part. It wasn't empty silence. It was a full, pregnant silence, a silence that was listening. I found myself holding my breath, straining to hear something, anything, over the blood rushing in my ears. Sarah was motionless beside me, her eyes glued to the screens, her expression a mask of concentration. Around the 2-hour mark, the microphone picked it up, faintly at first, then growing closer. Clicking. It was the sound she had described from her first night, the sound Old Man Hemlock had tried to imitate. A dry, rhythmic clicking, like smooth river stones being tapped together. It wasn't an animal sound. It was deliberate, methodical, and it was coming from multiple directions. I grabbed Sarah's arm, my nails digging into her flesh. She didn't flinch. She just pointed a trembling finger at the center monitor. Something was moving on the game trail. It stepped out from behind a thick oak tree, and my mind simply refused to process what I was seeing. The camera's night vision flattened the image, stripped it of color, but it couldn't hide the form. It was tall, impossibly tall and thin. Its limbs were long and jointed at angles that felt wrong, like a spider's legs grafted onto a vaguely humanoid torso. It moved with a slow, swaying grace that was utterly silent. No footfalls, no rustling of leaves. If it weren't for the camera, I wouldn't have known it was there. It had no discernible face. Where a head should be, there was just a smooth, pale ovoid shape that seemed to absorb the faint ambient light. There were no eyes, no mouth, no features at all. But I could feel it looking. I knew, with a certainty that froze the marrow in my bones, that it was scanning the forest. Then another one emerged from the left, and a third from the right. They moved in a loose formation, their tall, slender bodies swaying in a horrifying, silent ballet. And as they moved, their long, multi-jointed fingers would occasionally tap together, producing that dry, clicking sound. It was their language, their sonar. They were mapping a world in the dark. I wanted to scream, but the sound was trapped in my throat, a solid ball of terror. My body was completely paralyzed. This was real. The ghost story, the legend, the superstition, it was all real, and it was 10 times more horrific than my worst childhood nightmares. Sarah was just as frozen, but she was still functioning.
Her hand, shaken violently, reached out and adjusted the zoom on the main camera. The faceless head of the nearest creature filled the screen. The smooth surface wasn't entirely blank. It was patterned with faint swirling lines, like fingerprints on a massive scale. As we watched, a section of the surface seemed to ripple. It opened, not like a mouth, but like an aperture, a perfect black circle that appeared in the center of its face. From the opening, a low, resonant hum began to emanate. It was a sound that I felt more than heard, a vibration that seemed to travel through the ground, up my spine, and into the base of my skull. It was a deeply unpleasant, invasive sound. And then I saw what they were doing. They weren't just wandering, they were gardening. The lead creature stopped and tilted its smooth head toward a small sapling. It raised one of its long, spindly arms. Its fingers, which I now saw were tipped with something like polished obsidian, gently brushed against the leaves of the young tree. As it did, the tree shuddered. The leaves began to glow with a faint, sickly green luminescence. It was the same color as our monitor screens. The hum intensified, and the light from the leaves seemed to flow up the creature's arm, absorbed into its body. It was feeding, not on the tree itself, but on its life force, its vitality. They were culling the forest, tending it, keeping it in a state of perpetual low-level life, never letting anything grow too wild, too strong. They were energy vampires, and this entire valley, this ancient forest, was their garden. And we were just another crop. We watched, mesmerized and horrified, for what felt like an eternity. The Watchers, as I now called them in my mind, moved with an unnerving purpose through the woods. They tended to plants, drained energy from an unlucky raccoon that scurried across their path, leaving it twitching on the forest floor, and continued their silent, clicking patrol. They were heading, slowly but surely, towards the town, towards the houses, towards the sleeping, terrified people locked behind their bolted doors.
That's when the worst part happened. The microphone picked up a new sound. It was a sound that didn't belong here, a human sound. It was a cough, followed by a low moan. Sarah and I looked at each other, our eyes wide with the same horrifying realization. Someone was outside. We frantically scanned the cameras, panning them toward the edge of the woods. There, stumbling along the property line behind one of the houses, was a figure. Even in the grainy green light, I recognized him. It was Old Man Hemlock. He was in his pajamas, his thin frame silhouetted against the faint light leaking from a crack in his own shutters. He must have gotten confused, wandered out. The clicking stopped. All three watchers froze simultaneously. Their smooth heads swiveled in perfect unison toward the sound of the old man. They had heard him. "Oh no," Sarah breathed, her voice cracking. "No, no, no." They began to move. Their slow, swaying grace was gone, replaced by a swift, silent, predatory gait. They didn't run. They flowed over the ground, their long legs covering the distance with horrifying speed. They converged on Old Man Hemlock's position from three sides, a perfect triangulation of doom. He must have sensed them, because he stopped and looked around, his head cocked in confusion. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice thin and reedy. "Is somebody there?" The first watcher emerged from the shadows just feet from him. Hemlock didn't scream. He didn't have time. He just made a small, gasping sound, his eyes going wide with a final, terrible understanding. He had spent his entire life warning people about this moment, and now it was his. The watcher reached out one of its long arms. It didn't grab him. It didn't touch him. Its obsidian-tipped fingers just hovered a few inches from his chest.
The black aperture on its face opened wide, and the hum intensified to a deafening thrum that vibrated our very bones, even from our hiding spot. Old Man Hemlock began to glow. It was the same sickly green light we had seen on the leaves of the tree. It emanated from his entire body, outlining him in a ghastly aura. He was rigid, his mouth open in a silent scream, his eyes wide and vacant. The light flowed from him in visible streams, drawn into the watcher's waiting hand, up its arm and into its body. His life, his energy, his soul, whatever you want to call it, it was being siphoned out of him like water from a well. The other two watchers stood by, their heads tilted as if in observation. After a few seconds that stretched into an eternity, the light faded. Old Man Hemlock's body, now just a dull, gray husk in the night vision, crumpled to the ground like a pile of empty clothes. There was no blood, no wound, just emptiness. The lead watcher retracted its arm. The aperture on its face closed. It stood over the body for a moment, and then it did something that shattered the last of my composure. It raised its head towards the sky, towards the town, and from the black circle of its face came a sound. It wasn't the hum. It was a soft, high-pitched, melodic chime. A sound almost like satisfaction, a contented sigh. Then, as one, the three figures turned and flowed back into the deep woods, the rhythmic clicking of their fingers starting up once more as they disappeared into the darkness from which they came. Silence returned, a heavy, final silence that was now filled with the truth. I don't remember getting back to my house. The next thing I knew, the sun was streaming through a gap in my own shutters, and I was lying on my bedroom floor, shivering uncontrollably. Sarah was there, sitting in a chair, her face ashen, her eyes red-rimmed and staring at nothing. The expensive camera equipment was piled in a corner, looking like obscene, useless junk. We didn't speak for hours. There were no words. What could we say? We had seen the truth behind the ghost story. We had watched a man be harvested, consumed. The video files were on the laptop, a silent, damning testament to the night's horror. Undeniable proof. The town, the next day, was abuzz with the news. Old Man Hemlock had passed away. Heart attack in his sleep, the town doctor said. Natural causes. His daughter, who lived 2 towns over, had found him in his bed that morning. A peaceful end for a long-lived man. A peaceful end. In his bed. The lie was so blatant, so complete, it made me want to be sick. The doctor, the sheriff, whoever had found him first, they knew. They had to know. They found him outside, an empty shell, and they moved him. They created a story. They reinforced the cage. Because the truth was too terrible to bear. The lie was the foundation upon which Havenwood was built. That evening, Sarah and I sat in her motel room, the laptop open between us. We watched the footage again. The silent, graceful monsters. The glowing man. The empty husk falling to the ground. It was all there. The story of the century. "I have to release this," she said, her voice hollow. "The world needs to know. These people, they need to be saved." "Saved?" I asked, my own voice sounding dead to my ears. "Saved from what, Sarah? From the Watchers, or from the pact that keeps them at Dedi? You saw what they did to the forest. They're pruning it. What do you think they're doing to us? The rule, the fear, the disappearances, it's all part of the system. Old Man Hemlock was old, confused. He was a weed to be pulled. The pact isn't just about feeding them the ones who break the rules. It's about keeping the whole garden healthy." "What are you saying?" she asked, looking at me with dawning horror. "I'm saying, what if the sickness Elspeth Thorne wrote about is real?" I leaned forward, the pieces clicking together in my mind in a way that made me feel cold and old. What if it's some kind of psychic plague, something that drives people insane? And what if these things are the only thing holding it back? They feed on a little bit of our life force, our fear, and in exchange, they keep the real monster in its cage. We give them a tithe, a few unruly souls, and the ambient terror of the rest of us. And in return, they protect us from something far worse. What happens if you show this video to the world? The implications crash down on her. Her journalistic fire seemed to sputter and die, replaced by a deep, chilling understanding. People would come, she whispered. Scientists, the military, they would swarm this place. They would try to fight them, to kill them. And the pact would be broken, I finished. The covenant would be null and void. The watchers would either leave or they'd fight back. And what about the sickness? What if, with the gardeners gone, it's allowed to bloom? What if it spreads beyond this valley? You wouldn't just be exposing Havenwood, Sarah. You could be unleashing hell on the entire world. We were trapped. The truth was a poison. Releasing it could be an act of unimaginable destruction. Keeping it secret meant condemning the people of Havenwood, condemning ourselves to live in this gilded cage forever, feeding monsters in the dark to keep worse ones at bay. It was an impossible choice. We argued for 2 days. Sarah, the journalist, the truth seeker, railed against the idea of a cover-up. It went against everything she was. She paced the motel room, her hands flying as she made her points. We can't be complicit in this. People have a right to know. We can't let them keep sacrificing people. Who have they sacrificed? I countered, my voice weary. In my lifetime, maybe 4 people. 4 people who broke a rule they knew was absolute. It's a horrible, brutal calculus, Sarah, but think about it. 4 people in 25 years. How many people die in car crashes in your world every single day? We are safe here. No crime, no violence, just this one terrible price. It's not safety, it's slavery, she shot back. Maybe all safety is a form of slavery, I replied. We just get to see the face of our master. In the end, it was her own compassion that defeated her ambition. I took her to the town playground during the day. I pointed out the children, laughing and chasing each other in the bright sunlight, completely oblivious. I pointed out their parents, watching with loving eyes, their faces free from the kind of worries I imagined city people had. They were only worried about one thing, and they knew how to manage it. Look at them, I said quietly. They're happy. During the day, they live good lives, peaceful lives. If you release that video, you destroy all of this. Their peace is shattered forever. And for what? A truth that might kill them all? A truth they can't do anything about?
That night, she made her decision. We took the laptop, the cameras, the memory cards, all of it, down to the old quarry at the edge of town. We built a small fire, and one by one, we destroyed the evidence. We watched as the plastic casings of the memory cards melted and warped in the flames, the tiny repositories of our terrible secret turning to ash. We smashed the cameras against the rocks and threw the pieces into the deep, dark water of the quarry. Finally, with a heavy heart, Sarah reformatted the laptop, wiping the footage from existence. The only proof left was the image seared into our minds. She left the next morning. Our goodbye was quiet, freighted with everything we couldn't say. We had shared something that no one else in the world could ever understand. We were co-conspirators in the greatest and most terrible secret I could imagine. "Will you be okay?" she asked, her hand on the door of her Jeep. "I'll be the same," I said, which was the truest and saddest thing I could say. "What will you do?" "I don't know," she admitted, her eyes distant. "Find a different story to tell, I guess, a smaller one." She drove away, and I never saw her again. I don't know if she ever wrote another word. Sometimes I hope she didn't. Some truths are too heavy to carry, and I wouldn't wish that weight on anyone. I stayed in Havenwood. Where else could I go? I knew the truth now. I was no longer an ignorant prisoner of the rule. I was a willing warden. I got married.
I had children, and I taught them the rule with a seriousness that bordered on panic. I looked into their innocent eyes and I passed the sickness on, because it was better than the alternative. I watched them play in the sun, and I felt the weight of Elspeth Thorne's words, of my choice, settle into my bones. My life has been quiet, peaceful even. The days are good. We are a prosperous little town. The gardens are always lush, the harvests are always bountiful. We are well tended. And every few years, someone gets lost. A traveler's car breaks down at the wrong time. A teenager's rebellion goes a little too far. And the town grieves, and we tell the lies, and we move on. We pay the tithe. I am an old man now, much older than Hemlock was on that final night. My children are grown, with children of their own. And I look at my grandchildren, and I see the fear in their eyes as dusk begins to fall. The same fear I had, the same fear my father had. It is our inheritance. It is the wall that protects us. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind is just right, I think I can hear it. A faint, dry clicking from the woods that surround my home. The sound of our gardeners tending their crop. And I don't feel fear anymore, not really. Just a profound and endless sadness. A sadness for the choice I made. The choice to protect the cage instead of trying to break it. So now you know. You know the secret of my quiet little Ohio town. And you have a choice too. You can dismiss this as just another scary story, a creepypasta told by some anonymous voice on the internet. Or you can believe it. But if you do believe it, I have to ask you to do something for me. For all of us here in Havenwood. Keep our secret. Don't come looking for us. Because some truths don't set you free. They just show you the size of your cage. And some rules are there to protect the monsters. Especially when the monsters are protecting you.